Hey friends, criminal defense attorney Ryan Pacyga, and I'm going to tell you today about a story of a woman who was facing 2 counts of fentanyl charges in federal court, each with a 10-year mandatory minimum prison sentence, in a way that we were able to get her probation with no jail whatsoever. Now, every case is different, and no lawyer can promise outcomes on any case when you hire them. But oftentimes, the lawyer you choose can make a difference. An experienced lawyer who knows what they're doing in federal court, and someone who's ready to go above and beyond sometimes what the situation calls for or what the situation appears to be, can make all the difference in what kind of sentence you or your family member may get. Now, here's how this case went. So there's a woman who began dating a guy for a few weeks, and she kind of knew what he was up to, although not, I don't think, on the level that he was doing things on, right? And so at one point they're driving up in northern Minnesota, and there's a traffic stop because law enforcement had been watching this guy, and she's the driver. Well, they arrest him because he's got some outstanding warrants, and they had already had intel that he was moving up to another state to go do a fentanyl delivery. It turns out he was communicating with an undercover officer. So when they arrest him, they leave her at the scene and they check her out to a degree, and then she's free to go. And lo and behold, he gets in jail, and he's calling her and he's telling her that he needs to get bailed out. And so eventually the story goes that she's now texting on her phone to who she does not know is an undercover law enforcement agent who was the undercover buyer in these situations for this guy, right? And so she's texting with this guy and she's saying, hey, I have the stuff. They didn't find it. It's on me. I've got it. And, we can meet up and I can, get it to you because he needs money to get bailed out. Well, so they charge her as well, as you can imagine, and there was never a setup where she actually went to go meet with this undercover agent, right? Well, the case goes on, and she gets charged, and then she's insisting, listen, I really never had the stuff. I'm just following his directions, and the idea was to get money, and then this guy would give him the drugs later, which still left her exposed, right? You can imagine that. So I was talking to, after looking at that, and it looked on paper that didn't look kind of even believable, right? But I'm digging further into the case and I'm wanting to believe her, and I look into this more and I ask her some more questions, and I say, you know what, I'm going to try to go get more evidence than generally we're allowed to get in a federal case. So I tell the prosecutor I want X, Y, and Z more, and they're like, well, we don't have that. And I said, well, we got to get it. Either you guys go get it or I'm going to go subpoena it. There's got to be a way. Old jail calls from different jails that had not to do with this arrest here. I want to get this stuff, not even from the jail he was initially put in, but other jails as well. And let me put this together. And so finally, we convince the government to go hunt this stuff down, and we get it. And I review it, and lo and behold, there is some very helpful information out there. And again, this is not something that the government wanted to believe me about her limited culpability here and that she really didn't have the drugs. And I'm talking to a female prosecutor at the time, and she's saying, listen, there's an obvious place this lady could have hid the stuff and we couldn't have found it. And I said, do you think she'd hide that much of that stuff inside of herself? That's a lot of stuff to hide. And the prosecutor just didn't want to hear me out on it, right? Well, we persisted and persisted and persisted. And finally, with uncovering the language in some of these calls and everything, and talking to the other defendant's lawyer who we thought we were going to be able to get a statement from, but they wouldn't even agree to do that, so that fell down on us, and that's okay. We can't make people give those. But we stayed with it, and at one point I was telling the federal prosecutor, listen, she's not going to plead to distribution and she's not going to plead to possession. I know you think she did. We think there's reasonable doubt there, at least, in fact, I believe she truly didn't possess it despite what she was texting, and we'll go to trial on it. Oh, that was a big risk for my client because these were 10-year mandatory minimum sentences she was facing if she was found guilty of that or pled guilty to that. Eventually, through our extra efforts, we were able to convince the prosecution to give what's called an information, which is an amended charge, if you will, without an indictment, to electronic communications facilitating a drug transfer, if you will, which is a much lower crime. It's still a federal felony, but much lower. The battle wasn't over there yet. I mean, on the one hand, that was a big win because she got out from under 2 10-year mandatory minimum prison sentence charges. But the guidelines, which is what the judge began their analysis with on the sentencing guidelines, still had her around, I want to say, 40 months. There's a range, but it was, like 35 to 42 months or something. I'm making up the numbers right now, but they're close to that. And so judges, they don't have to sentence on guidelines if there's mandatory minimums, but, still they'll usually go close to that. Sometimes they'll give a variance below that, of course. But at a sentencing hearing, through our efforts, I was happy to report that our client received a sentence from the judge of 3 years of probation, no jail, and she could get some help with some things going on right here. This was so important to this woman because she has a 13-year-old child, and she's a single mother. But we were able to get that sentence, and even at one point able to convince the government that that was a just sentence in that situation, which is very rare to do. And so every case is unique. No lawyer can guarantee those things. No lawyer can always get what's called an information and get people out from under the charges in the indictment. But anybody who is doing this long enough and is willing to take cases to trial can sometimes get those results for people. But it does make a difference. Had we not believed her when she was persisting that she really didn't have this stuff despite what she was texting, she would have not been out from under these charges, and we had to make the real hard determination about whether to go to trial and face a 10-year mandatory minimum sentence if she was convicted, or plea to it. Not a fun choice to make either way, but that kind of persistence can pay off. I'm also grateful that at one point we were able to convince the U.S. Attorney's Office to take a deeper look with us at that, and that we weren't going to back down about that. And then eventually to win them over with respect to what a sentencing argument would look like and what would be fair under the circumstances to recommend to the judge, right? And all of those things were taken into account, right? So it doesn't happen every time that way, but it can really make a difference, and it's a really happy story. At the end of that hearing, I got to hug her, and tears were rolling down her cheek. I mean, she was crying so hard, my shoulder got a little wet from it, right? And the gratitude that her and her friends have, and me knowing that she's going to be able to go back to her child. Because a couple days before the sentencing hearing, she had to have her child move over to a family member's house because she wasn't sure if she was going to be coming home that day at sentencing. There's no guarantees, And to be able to have her go home to her child so that her child, who already doesn't have a father in his life, would be able to keep his mother in his life, and she'd be able to be there. And we got a recommendation that she get some education while she's on probation so that she's more employable and perhaps doesn't need to be as susceptible to making some choices about who she's going to be in relationships with, and put her life in a better place, which is another big part of the work that us defense lawyers strive to do, at least some of us do. So that's a great outcome, and I'm just happy to report it. I can't give anybody false hope and say, if you hire a lawyer, you're going to get probation under the worst of circumstances. It's very uncommon in federal court to get a probation-only sentence, especially when the original charge calls for mandatory minimums in prison. But having a lawyer that's willing to turn over every stone and go the extra mile and keep hearing you out on your story here, and really push to get the best result possible can make a difference. And sometimes at the end of the cases, we're not always convinced that justice was done, right? Sometimes we think the prosecution should have been more fair to someone, or that a judge should have been more fair to someone, or that a jury didn't see things right. I mean, that can happen in this world of criminal defense, especially in federal court. But there are good stories that can come from this, and I'm really happy for her. And I just want you guys to know that sometimes those things are possible out there. So, make sure you're staying true to what's true in your case. Make sure that you're trying to turn over every stone that's out there, and make sure you have a lawyer that's persistent about your story, about what's going on out there, and seeking what is really fair in your case. So I can't give you more particulars on anyone else's case right now out there, but this can make a difference. I hope it gives you some hope if you're facing a case. I hope that it gives you some ideas to talk about with a lawyer, or what kind of lawyer to hire when you're looking for one. And I hope at the end of the day that it puts a smile on your face, and that you can know that there are certainly times where the justice system gets it right. And I think this was one of those situations where it came out right, and that everybody can grow from it and get the right result. The guy that was up in this situation, he did get a decade or more in prison for his role, which was, he was just so much more culpable. But that's what I wanted to let you know about this case. If you have questions about criminal cases in state or in federal court, I'm criminal defense attorney Ryan Pacyga. I'm based in Minnesota, but I take cases across the nation. And if I might be able to be helpful for you, you can get a hold of me. You can find me at arrestedmn.com, or you can give me a call at 612-339-5844. Have a good day, friends.